In the last few lessons, we've been exploring the psychology and psychological approaches from behaviorism. We've been talking about conditioning, we've been talking about the specifically operant and classical conditioning. Well, in this lesson, what we're going to do is talk about how we can use behaviorism to describe processes within learning. So learning theory more specifically. And we're joined here by René Descartes for some reason, but you know what, we'll just move on and carry on. So as an introduction, the studies on classical and operant conditioning have been proven to show some insightful behaviourist research. It's been shown that you can condition behaviour, using these methods. Using a classical approach, like for example with Pavlovian conditioning and Pavlov's dogs, and using operant conditioning, so the research carried out by Skinner on rats. Now, there have also been studies done into the behaviour of humans, and this is a very key example that we're going to talk about here, and we're going to talk about the way in which that the conditioning has been used to influence behaviour in humans. And this is the Watson and Rayner case from 1920, or the Watson and Rayner case study from 1920, also known as the Little Albert study. So this is a case study. Now, what happens in this study is we introduce a participant. The participant is an 11-month-old boy called Albert. Okay. Now, Albert shows at the start of the study no fear of fluffy toys, such as a rabbit. Okay, and this is important. So there is no indication that little Albert has any kind of, presupposition to a fear of fluffy toys. And what they did was condition, or attempt to condition, some kind of fear of fluffy toys into Albert. That's what they wanted to achieve. And so they placed Albert down and placed down a fluffy toy. And whenever Albert reached for the fluffy toy, the researchers would loudly strike a metal bar behind his head. Okay? Now, this is not in any way an endorsement of this case study, because it was done in 1920, and I think the ethical implications of this study would mean it wouldn't be done today. But anyway, this was a repetitive process. Whenever Albert reached for the fluffy toy, metal bar struck behind his head. You can probably work out that this is a very similar to a kind of classical conditioning. Okay? Because what we're doing here is we have introduced the stimuli, the fluffy toy. Okay? The response to the stimuli, the fluffy toy, is just no fear at all. Just, a general normal response. Okay? We've then introduced a secondary stimuli, a conditioned stimuli, something that we want to condition. And this is the loudly striking of the metal bar. And we're trying to condition the behaviour, or condition the emotion of fear into the child. And after a while, after this was repeated and repeated, okay, they would remove this stimuli. They would remove the striking of the metal bar and just present Albert with the fluffy object. And regardless of whether or not the metal bar being struck was anywhere, was present, okay, Albert would show fear and start to cry whenever presented with the fluffy object. So we have conditioned this response to this neutral stimuli. Okay, just like the Pavlovian conditioning with the dog, you've got the dog, you've got the ringing of the bell and the presentation of food. Right here we have the fluffy toy, we have the ringing of the metal bar striking very loudly, and then we remove this secondary stimuli and present with the original, and we have changed the behaviour of the individual, in this case little Albert. And so this means that the fear for fluffy objects was conditioned into the child. Now, before we move on, if we want to evaluate this study does show quite clearly that we can not just apply principles of classical and operant conditioning to animals, we can also do it to humans as well. Okay, so that's a tick. And if you think back to some of the presumptions of behaviorism, one of the assumptions that are made is that behavior in humans works very similar to behavior in animals. So this kind of shows this to be the case. It shows that we can take the kind of assumptions that we made about conditioning in animals, and we can apply that to humans. Okay. However, we ought to, if we're assessing this case, this is an incredibly ethically, some very big ethical issues. Let's just say that some big ethical issues in this case. Some big ethical issues for this case study. Let's just leave it as that. Okay. And this brings us to an assessment of behaviorism more broadly. Okay, because we've demonstrated using conditioning that we can actually show that we can use classical and operant conditioning to change behavior in case studies. And so that seems to be a very good sign that behaviorism works as a psychological theory. And one of the things that needs to be noted is that while this is the case, most of the research, okay, despite the little Albert study with Watson and Rayner, most of the research has been done on animals, okay, and while the little Albert study shows that we can condition responses and we can condition behavior into humans, okay, it's also the case that the story is a little bit more complex with humans. One of the reasons why the story is more complex in humans is because we have other influence, other factors that need to be accounted for. So this may be the case in animals as well, of course, but genetics also contributes to different behavior in humans. Okay, mental cognitive processes can also influence behavior. The third one is we can also think about social behavior. Social behavior. And we're going to talk about social behavior in the next lesson when we talk about social learning theory. Social learning theory. But these are all different ways in which we can critique behaviorism, or maybe assume, maybe make the case that behaviorism isn't the whole picture, that we have a number of other things that we could probably raise when it comes to assessing behaviorism.